Imagine finding yourself in a courtroom being sued by a river. If we were in Ecuador or Bolivia right now, this could very well be the case. You see, these countries have granted rights to nature. In Ecuador, Mother Earth has the right to existence, maintenance, regeneration, and in Bolivia, Mother Earth's rights include the right to clean air, water, and life. If we were to infringe on these rights, we could very well find ourselves in that courtroom being sued by a river. When I first came across this idea a year ago, I wondered why on earth South Africa had not taken the same strides. Ecuador and Bolivia are developing countries. South Africa is a developing country. Socioeconomically speaking, then, our contexts are rather similar. But who here, and please raise your hand, has ever heard of giving rights to nature? My friends, of course. But point proven. And so I began to do some digging. And I started with the indigenous people of South America. In Ecuador, 6.6% of the population is of indigenous heritage. In Bolivia, that number is as high as between 41 and 48%, depending on which census you consider. While the majority of these people live in urban areas, many still live as communities in rural areas and in the Amazon. In spite of this, only in the 1980s did indigenous communities begin seeing the first ounces of legal recognition from their nations. Now, when I thought of this, I wondered why on earth would these people have so little legal recognition, and what did this have to do with the environment? Well, you see, these communities were dependent on the environment to sustain their daily living. Therefore, if they were ever truly to be protected in terms of their law, the environment needed protecting at the same time. And hence, in 2008, we saw the watershed moment where Ecuador became the first nation in the world to grant rights to nature. And Bolivia, of course, followed suit in 2010. After making these findings, I realized that South Africa's context was in fact far different from South America's. Our indigenous communities of the Khoisan make up only 1% of our population. Further, our constitution has already granted rights to nature. Therefore, South Africa's failure to grant rights to nature had to be attributed to something other than the empowerment of our indigenous communities. There's a social ecologist named Murray Bookchin, and he argues that our environmental issues are sourced in our social issues. The gravest social issue for South Africa, I believe, is our socio-economic inequality. Our Gini coefficient is 0.63, making us the most unequal nation in the world. But we know this because millions of South Africans live through poverty each day. The proof lies merely in a drive to Hout Bay, where we see two worlds existing in one. One named Hout Bay, the other named Imizamo Yethu. It's understandable then why we see so much inaction in South Africa in the face of a climate crisis. How can we expect people to care about conservation when their most immediate concern is where their next meal will come from? It seems that we first then need to address our socio-economic inequality before we can divert our full attention to the environment. Yet at the same time, we know that the climate crisis does not afford us the luxury of time. We need to address our socio-economic inequality and our environmental issues at the same time. We need to marry those battles together. This begs the question of what is at the center of our socio-economic inequality. Well, Bookchin argues that humans have this ingrained habit for domination. Think of apartheid. It was a system where one group thought they were better than everyone else. We see subtle dominations today. Think of institutionalized racism, patriarchy, classism. All these systems function on the premise that one group is the dominant in society. This had me thinking that if we could dominate people, then perhaps we could dominate non-humans as well. Perhaps we could dominate the planet. And the most clear example of our domination over the planet is the Anthropocene. What? Anthropocene. This is the name that geologists give to the geological time frame or epoch we live in today. What's characteristic about the Anthropocene is that humans have been elevated to the status where we are now seen as a force of nature. Over the last few hundred years, our activity has become so significant that we have shaped the very processes of this planet. Signs include the 6th mass extinction, draining of half of the Earth's wetlands, and of course, climate change, to name a few. To elaborate, we began entering this Anthropocene in the mid-1800s because industrialization began spreading across the globe. Technology afforded us this power to be able to transform natural resources into whatever we desired. This is the essence of our domination over the planet. Technology gave us this power to satisfy needs we never even knew we had, such as the need for straws to drink our water. It seems then that if we dominate people and we dominate the planet, our issue lies with domination. Yet luckily for us, humans have the ability to exercise reason and choice. And the motivator to exercise that choice to do better is empathy. Empathy motivates change. When our friend has a heartbreak, we empathize. When an animal is abused, we empathize. When the planet is harmed and we see all those images of starving polar bears, we empathize because we feel it. And when we feel things deeply enough, we cannot ignore them. We need to tap into that empathy because when we do, our consideration for the planet strengthens. Our daily habits will eventually change. And when our habits change, it indicates we have had a shift in perspective. When perspective shifts, so too does policy and eventually law. What I'm advocating for is not necessarily that you change your entire lifestyle by tonight. What I'm advocating for is that we change our daily habits from ones of domination and consumerism to ones which respect and protect the environment. So have that meatless Monday and reuse that plastic bag because every action counts. And the fantastic thing about empathy is that it empowers. For those at the bottom of our socioeconomic ladder, they are empowered by the climate crisis because when we change our habits and our perspectives to caring more for the environment, we create more startups, more projects, more businesses, and we empower our socioeconomic community. For those who are at the middle of our socioeconomic ladder, and especially at the top, what the Anthropocene requires of them and us is to rethink our daily comforts. Industrialization and consumerism have spoilt us for choice. Tired of your earphones because they've got wires? Well, luckily for you, they're now made without. Don't feel like walking to Upper today? Not to worry. There's a jammy for that. So what's required of us now is to rethink that desire every time when we just want a little bit of convenience and comfort in our life. So print less and walk more, because after all, if millions of actions contributed to the Anthropocene, millions more can contribute to its mitigation. Pragmatically speaking, what's required of us is to begin this process of an education of empathy. Our children deserve to be taught to reconnect with that empathy to the planet, because when they do so, we have an entire generation who is motivated to change their habits and their perspectives, because they will feel and they will be triggered by the harms we do to the planet. And if you, like me, are a little too old to go back to primary school, then not to worry, because you can learn to change your perspective and daily habits through stories like what I am sharing with you. Thank you.